A friend called me the other day. They said that I should invest in a certain character so that way they could support a support for Cyno. And I said, that sounds like a pyramid scheme. Please help, I'm running out of Egypt puns. Hello, Cyno havers. It's time to talk about some of Cyno's best teams. You guys have been patiently waiting, and I am here to deliver. Being a super fun Electro unit, he has a lot of awesome synergies, but his teams are kind of limited just due to the amount of field time that Cyno needs to take up. Nevertheless, we're going to be talking about 5 teams that you can use with Cyno to deal big damage. Most of these teams will have substitutes, so if they seem expensive at first, I'll be providing some 4-star options for them, at least for the teams that have them. Also, you can use Thundering Fury in these teams, but all of these teams' energy requirements I'm going to list are assuming you're not using Thundering Fury, and they're also assuming that you're going to have Favonius on one of the characters in them. With that being said, my name is Braxophone, and let's talk about some of Cyno's teams. The first team we're going to be talking about today is an Aggravate team for Cyno. Now, this is going to be one of his higher damaging teams. This team features Cyno, DendroMC, Beidou, and Kazuha. Now, as a general note, you can actually replace DMC with Kale here and give Kale Elegy for the end, and that will actually be a really solid support weapon for her. But generally speaking, for all the teams I'm going to be showing you, DendroMC is going to be the one we feature. Now, the point of this team is to use Aggravate to increase your Electro damage. If you didn't know, Electro and Dendro together starts Quicken, and Quicken allows you to aggravate or spread. Aggravate is basically just the Electro version of Spread, which is going to increase your damage by a certain amount depending on your elemental mastery. In this team, Kazuha is going to debuff enemy resistances and buff your team's elemental damage if you build him with elemental mastery. Now, the important thing to know is that it is with elemental mastery. If you play attack, damage, crit Kazuha, your team's buff is going to be weaker and he's actually going to have a lot less use in this team. Also, while he's off field, Viridescent Venerer won't actually work. It has to activate when he is on the field. Enemies will maintain the resistance shred while off the field. However, to activate the set for the very first time, you have to be on it. However, the buff from his passive actually works when he's not on the field, which means that all of the damage bonus he gives to your team will keep refreshing even when he's not on the field, meaning that Cyno, with his extended burst duration of about 18 seconds, will still be getting Kazuha's buff even long after Viridescent wears off. Also, when you swirl Electro with Kazuha before using Beidou's burst, it allows Beidou to snapshot the Electro damage bonus for the entire duration of her burst, which just makes her damage higher overall. In this team, Kazuha is also running Favonius to help out with energy, and on the topic of energy, Cyno's elemental skill spam will also help to battery Beidou. The more you're able to use Cyno's skill, the less energy needs Beidou will have. Once again, speaking of energy, in this team, Cyno only really needs about 120% energy recharge. He doesn't actually need a whole lot because you have Beidou and because you have Favonius on Kazuha. In this team for this rotation, you want to start off with Beidou's skill for some energy and quick damage, use Kazuha's elemental skill to swirl Electro and debuff enemies while also giving your team an Electro damage bonus. Use DendroMC's skill and burst, back into Beidou's elemental burst, which will allow Beidou to snapshot the Electro damage bonus, then straight into Kazuha's elemental burst, and then into Cyno for his skill and burst. Once that's done, you just rinse and repeat. This rotation is actually quite easy to follow and will get you some pretty solid damage in your Aggravate team. One last note about this team is that you can actually slot Fischl for Beidou. If you don't want to use Beidou, or if you don't have a high investment Beidou, Fischl is a pretty solid character here. She'll help battery Cyno, and she'll also add a lot of damage to your team with Aggravate and her Ascension 4 passive. The main reason we chose Beidou here is because Fischl actually has less uptime than Beidou in the Cyno teams, since Cyno wants to use 18 seconds of his burst, and you can't refresh Oz during that period of time. Also, because Cyno generates decent energy, Beidou can be relatively smooth in these teams, so I prefer Beidou here, but Fischl can also work. Overall, this is one of the easiest teams to play for him and one of the most rewarding, and I highly recommend giving it a try if you're trying to do high-end content. The next team we're going to be talking about is a Cyno Hyperbloom team, featuring Cyno, DendroMC, Xingqiu, and Yelan. Now, the reason we run double Hydro here is because it allows Cyno to get most of the Hyperblooms while effectively working as a pseudo Taser team. This team has really high single target damage with Xingqiu, Yelan, and Hyperblooms, and Yelan actually increases Cyno's personal damage as long as her burst is up. The longer it's up, the more damage bonus he's getting. Xingqiu here will give you some stagger resistance and small healing, which can really help. It's one of the hardest things about Dendro teams right now now is that you don't have a healer, and on top of the stagger resistance, you're also getting damage reduction. In this team, you don't have Kazuha, but you can run Favonius Warbow on Yelan to help battery the rest of your team a little bit, while also helping with her personal energy needs. It just makes the rotation feel a lot smoother. Now, Dendro MC is currently the best for Dendro application, but that could be replaced by Nahida when she comes out. If it turns out that she applies a lot of Dendro fast, she may be the go-to here. As far as energy needs, there is no second Electro in this team by default, so energy needs are much higher for Cyno. For ER in this team, I recommend about 140%. Now keep in mind, this is without Thundering Fury, and this is without an Electro in the team. If you were to say slot out Yelan for Beidou or Kuki, for example, you may find that you only need about 120, 130, and if you have Thundering Fury, you'll need less than that. As far as rotation goes, you want to use Dendro MC's Elemental Skill and Burst into Xingqiu's Elemental Skill and Burst, and that'll already start off some blooms really quickly. Then follow that up with Yelan's Elemental Skill and Burst, and then Cyno's Elemental Skill and Burst, and then just start spamming normal attacks and skills. The reason you use Xingqiu before Yelan here is because Xingqiu's Burst has a longer cooldown and lasts a little bit longer than Yelan's, and so by using Xingqiu first, you can actually make it so it lines up a lot better. Now technically you can swap out Yelan for Beidou or Kuki, but the team does lose out on some damage overall. The benefit you get from using Yelan instead of another Electro is pretty dang high, and especially because it allows you to control who's getting the Hyperbloom. For example, if you did put Kuki in here, Kuki would be getting some of the Hyperblooms, which is great, but she's not dealing any personal damage outside of the Hyperblooms. Meanwhile, Cyno could have just taken care of it himself, and even though the Hyperbloom damage from him would have been lower, the damage you'd get from using Yelan instead would be a lot higher. And then just as a reminder, you can also use Beidou here instead if you prefer, but I recommend double Hydro if you have it. The Hyperbloom team is a lot of fun because it has a lot of numbers on screen and a lot of different colors that I don't know, it's just really stimulating for my ADHD brain. I highly recommend you guys give it a try. So the next two teams are standard meta teams with Cyno slotted into them, so I wanted to take less time explaining both, but I still have rotations to give you. The first team is Cyno Taser, featuring Cyno, Beidou, Xingqiu, and Kazuha. Taser has always been strong because it takes some of the strongest units in the game and just throws them together in an electrocharge team that spams quick and frequent damage. To put it briefly, Xingqiu and Beidou will proc electrocharge damage while also dealing high personal damage. Kazuha will debuff enemy resistances and let you snapshot an electro damage buff onto Beidou, and Cyno will help battery Beidou and be the main on-field driver for the team. For energy needs, because this team has another electro character in it, you only really need about 120%, but in content against just one larger enemy, you may find that you need a little bit more. It kind of just depends on what weapons you decide to use as well. As for rotation, you want to use Beidou's Elemental Skill, Kazuha's Tap Skill, Xingqiu's Elemental Skill and Burst, Beidou's Burst, Kazuha Burst, and Cyno's Elemental Skill and Burst. Once you're done with Cyno's Burst, go ahead and rinse and repeat. For substitutes, you could use someone like Sucrose instead of Kazuha to activate Viridescent, and if you have C6 Sucrose, you can actually give your team an Electro or Hydro damage bonus with her Burst being infused. However, as far as Xingqiu for Yelan, I personally wouldn't substitute Xingqiu for Yelan here just because Yelan doesn't give you the healing and damage reduction, even though she does increase your team's damage a bit. Next up on the list is going to be Cynonational, and that's going to feature Cyno, Bennett, Xiangling, and Xingqiu. This team is fairly straightforward. You're basically just going to use Bennett to buff your Xiangling and a bit of your Cyno's Burst. Xiangling will maintain Bennett's attack buff even after the circle is gone, and Xingqiu will allow you to vaporize some of Xiangling's hits. Similarly to Raiden National, you'll also be getting tons of overload damage. The downside of this team is basically that the damage and battery are going to be worse than if you were to just do Raiden National, but overall it's still pretty strong. For this team, you're going to need a little bit more energy recharge, looking at around 160% unless you're on something like Thundering Fury or if you're running Fav. And then as for rotation, you're basically just going to use Xingqiu's Elemental Skill and Burst, followed by Bennett's Elemental Skill and Burst, Xiangling's Burst, and Cyno's Elemental Skill and Burst. Both of those teams we just talked about, the Taser and the National team, are super easy to play, and they get decent results because you're just shoving so many strong units into one team that it's kind of hard for them to be bad. There's one last team that I want to show you guys today, and that is going to be the Cynoverload team. I'm sure there's other names for it, but I just like Cynoverload. This team is more for fun. Its damage ceiling isn't quite as high as some of Cyno's other teams, but it's a cool way to play some underused characters. This team features Cyno, Kuki, Toma, and Dendro MC. Though this team doesn't have the best damage ever, I was able to clear Abyss with it, so it is possible. It might just take a lot of investment. To play this team, you're going to want to build Kuki full Elemental Mastery with the Gilded Dreams set, and then also build Toma with Gilded Dreams if possible, but give him some energy recharge as well. He needs a lot of energy recharge to have his burst up on cooldown, so that usually requires something like Favonius and an energy recharge Sans. When When you have Dendro being applied, you'll have both Quicken and Burning being applied over and over. You're going to have Cyno, Kuki, and Dendro MC triggering Quicken, and you're going to have Dendro MC and Toma triggering Burning. Now, the trigger in this team is unpredictable, which is why Toma and Kuki both have the ability to be the trigger. The overloads from Kuki and or Toma should be dealing pretty solid damage overall. If Cyno is accidentally the trigger, the overload damage is still pretty decent from his personal elemental mastery as well. So all in all, you just have a lot of different overload reactions going off in addition to Cyno's personal damage and some aggravates. I've also noticed that this team for me is really comfortable since you get to play Cyno with both a shield and a healer. Now in this team, I personally recommend about 120% energy recharge, but you may find that you need more just depending on the content. Just make sure that Toma has Favoni's Lance on him if you want to be able to have smoother rotations. Speaking of rotations, for this team you have to be very careful. This is very precise. If you mess this up, you can burn Dendro MC's flower and basically render the entire team useless for a rotation. You're going to want to start off with Toma's elemental skill and burst, and immediately follow that up with Dendro MC's elemental skill and then their burst as well. Do not attack between the time period of Toma's elemental burst and Kuki's elemental skill. Right after Dendro MC's elemental skill and burst, you're going to switch to Kuki, use her elemental skill, and that will actually activate the buff for Electro with Dendro MC, preventing it from being burned anymore. Then, following that, you just want to use Cyno's elemental skill and burst, and all is good. Just as a note, you can technically replace Dendro MC with Kale, but you're going to end up with a lot less reactions and a lot less Dendro uptime. So though it is harder to play with Dendro MC and you have to be a lot more careful, it does have a lot higher of a reward if you use Dendro MC over Kale. But if you do use Kale, you can also use Elegy, which will buff your Kuki and Toma, so there's that as well. All in all, as I said, this team isn't super strong, but it's a lot of fun and I really enjoy it. As always, thanks for watching, everyone. These have been 5 teams you should try with Cyno, and I hope that you learned something from this video, whether that's just a rotation or about how a certain character works. If you guys are enjoying Cyno, let me know down in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe to the channel where I upload lots of Genshin content and potentially some other content in the future. Also, consider checking out my Twitch at twitch.tv/Braxophone. We'll be live on October 3rd pulling for Cyno. Thanks again, everyone, and I'll catch you next time.